welcome to the Total Soccer Show and our weekly deep dive into Maurizio Pochettino's squad. It's USMNT Weekly. Today, we're looking at the US stars who made a domestic move this January. We're previewing the US stars who'll be lighting up MLS this season, and perhaps we'll tackle a few listener questions as well. My name's Ryan Bailey. Joining me today, it's your friend, it's my friend, it's Taylor Wacko. Hello, Taylor.
Hello, Ryan Bailey. It's good to have you back. It's good to not do the introduction and have to come up with rhymes and clever things to do to begin the episode. I'm glad that that's now fully back on your shoulders.
You did a sterling job, Taylor. Actually, I won't say. I never listen to the episodes when I'm not on them. I don't know if you did a sterling job.
Thank you for that ringing endorsement, Ryan. But your actual honesty is appreciated as well.
I never listen to them, Taylor, because I'm too busy tending to the peacocks on my country pile.
There it is. Well, see, but now I know that you're lying because we know that you have handlers for that. You're not tending to the peacocks. I'm assuming you're ordering the handlers to then deal with the peacocks appropriately and accordingly.
Darn it, he's found me out. Joe Lowry's here also. Joe, question for you. Do you know the collective noun for peacocks?
Oh, it's probably something silly and Seussian, like a gaggle or a cobble of peacocks. I don't know, one of those with an L and a double consonant in there somewhere.
I don't know which school you went to, Joe, but of course it is an ostentation of peacocks.
Oh, yeah, that was going to be the next thing I said. It was gaggle, cobble, and then ostentation. No, it was right on the tip of my tongue. Don't worry about it.
That's a very good one. It is still number 2 for me behind a grouping of flamingos. Do we know that one?
Ooh.
It is not a Ford Madison. It is not a flock. It is indeed a flamboyance of flamingos.
Whoa.
Which is outstanding and terrific.
Oh, that's so good. Both of these are excellent. Both are absolutely excellent.
An ostentation of peacocks. You would know that, Ryan. Is it the ostentation estate? Is the ostentation like green? What paddock? What do you call that area where they all kind of roam about?
Well, it's also where my Parliament of Owls and my Murder of Crows are situated as well. It's just the bird area. Birds have good collective nouns. That's what we're learning.
They really do. It's just the bird area. That's awesome.
All right, well, let's get to some USMNT Weekly, shall we? But before we do, patreon.com/Total Soccer Show is the best way to support us. On there, you will find bonus episodes, bonus video, and access to our Discord server where we're all discussing collective nouns and much more. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. And if you like our faces and Taylor wearing 3-piece suit, still listening to the theme.
Not anymore. Not anymore. Not after
check that out.
sweating out all of the sweat that I could sweat yesterday. I'm back to T-shirts. Yeah.
So it's a weight loss technique in a way, then, what you did there.
Yeah, from now on I'm going to wrap myself up in trash bags a la wrestlers trying to make weight, and that's how I'm going to record. It should work and should make me pass out or be even more delirious than I already am.
Wonderful stuff. You can check that out on YouTube where we put all our episodes now. The link in the show notes for our YouTube. Let's get to our episode, shall we? Joe, I'd love to start, if you are accommodating to this, with a bit of a European transfer window roundup for our American stars. Why don't we start with Caleb Wiley, who's now on loan at the location which is the furthest north anyone should ever travel in the UK, Watford. What do we make of this move? Still a Chelsea player on the books there. Of course, he's on loan at Watford. What are we making of Wiley's latest move?
Ryan, I'm so glad you're back. You're right back into your top form, roasting the north of England. I'm very, very here for it. I think this is a fascinating move for Caleb Wiley, who was for the first half of this year on loan at Strasbourg, who is Chelsea's much younger and less favorable sister club. That is the relationship under the Todd Boehly football empire, I suppose. And he started the year quite well and was getting regular minutes at left wing back, and then hurt his knee and was out for a little bit, and then he got back, and then he dislocated his shoulder. It has been a tough stretch for Caleb Wiley. Now he's going to Watford, as you said, Ryan. They're currently sitting 12th in the championship. I think this is a fascinating move because I'm curious to see how he does in the championship, which is a good league. It's not a great league, but it's a good league. And it's one that is going to force him to continue to develop his physicality, which is, I think, something that could be a strength of his, but that he's not really had to rely on over the course of his career between Atlanta and then that quick pit stop in Liga after moving to Chelsea from Atlanta United and going out on loan. The thing that I'm a little curious about for this move is I don't have a great feel on exactly how much he's going to play. Certainly not right off the bat. Yassir Larouci is the regular starter on the left side of Watford's defense, and he has played a lot of minutes for them so far this year. He is just on loan at Watford from a Ligue 2 side over in France. So it's not as if Watford have a ton invested in him. but they also don't have a ton invested in Caleb Wiley. So this is going to be a good test for him to see if he can beat somebody out, get meaningful minutes. Now, there are a bunch of games in the championship, which does bode well for Caleb Wiley, but this is not going to be a cakewalk for him, and I'm really curious to see how it's going to go.
I did read also that Larouci, I think, is left-footed, but can play either left wing back or right wing back, as well as left back, right back. They have Jeremy Ngakia. He's a 24-year-old right back, left wing back. He is right-footed. He's played 13 matches, 12 starts for Watford. So you could also see some rotation where maybe it's Ngakia and Larouci. Maybe Larouci isn't starting at right back or right wing back, and then maybe Caleb Wiley comes in. But I do think that wing-back consistency is a thing that makes me excited. That's what he had at Strasbourg, as Joe mentioned, and then has the injuries. But now to go to Watford, where that is, it seems to be their prevailing tactic. Occasionally they're showing up in a back four, but largely in that back three with the two wing-backs, means that there is some consistency for Caleb Wiley. So even if he's not starting right away, it does feel like a position where he has familiarity and some level of comfort. So then we might see him, hopefully, challenge for minutes sooner rather than later.
And I like that we started with Caleb Wiley, because I think a lot of my interest and the interest of folks who watch the U.S. men's national team a whole bunch is how are these players at club level setting themselves up for success, right? How are they moving to put themselves in, Mauricio Pochettino's eye line? How are they being in positions to go ahead and progress their careers and to be in a position to better help the U.S. men's national team? I think Caleb Wiley could be a player who's at the World Cup a year from now. I think it's unlikely, given that the Strasbourg move kind of was cut short and he's dealt with some injuries this year. I think the clock is very much ticking with just over a year away now, basically between now and that World Cup. But left back is still a question mark. Not the starter. It's Jedi Robinson written in pen at this point. But if Pochettino wants to bring another left back to the World Cup, and I would imagine he would, that's up for grabs. Still, Christopher Lund is basically out of the picture at this point. And after that, there haven't been a lot of players who have really been brought in to get meaningful minutes in that spot. So it could be Caleb Wiley, it could be John Tolkin that we talk about shortly. It could be that Poch doesn't want to bring a backup left back because he thinks Des can do that job, or that Tim Ream, as we talked about in the roster predictions episode a week or so ago now, it could be that he thinks there's enough cover from inside the squad already. But if you are a left back who is eligible for the U.S. men's national team, and this has been true for a long, long time, the door is most likely open for you to get minutes or to be at least a part of this team. And that's why I'm watching Wiley and Tolkin with special interest right now.
For people not watching the video, I was nodding along for the majority of the end of that part from Joe, because I think that is the thing that I keep going back to with Wiley and with most of the players we're going to talk about today, at least from a European perspective, is the idea that I don't know how many of these guys are ever going to start or be consistent starters for the U.S. I don't know how many of them are really going to challenge for minutes or be on that World Cup squad. What I do know is that you want options and you want depth. And I think that's what all these guys are going to be for the United States, is potential depth options. But if Caleb Wiley is playing regularly in the championship in a position that has some parallel to the USMNT, I don't think he's going to supplant Jedi Robinson anytime soon. I think there are probably others who might be ahead of him on that depth chart. But if injuries happen, if there are hiccups along the way, you want there to be options there who can come in and do somewhat of a parallel job. Christopher Lund, as Joe mentioned, is I would say out of the picture because he is just so much more of a stay-at-home left back. We saw him try to be more adventurous at times and try to get more involved in the attack. And it's not like he failed miserably, but I think it's not naturally what comes to him. It's not something that he is naturally comfortable doing. I think he wants to be a more defensive left back option, whereas having an attacking wing back in Caleb Wiley, even if he is not going to be a starter for the U.S., having him getting minutes, hopefully, in the championship, and then theoretically in that conversation, makes the pool deeper, makes the U.S. stronger.
All right, well, let's start talking Tolkien, shall we? He should be getting quite a few minutes. He's got minutes already, obviously, for Holstein Kiel in the Bundesliga, played in that game against Bayern at the weekend, that dramatic attempted comeback, Taylor. We think he might have some good fortunes here in the Bundesliga. Maybe the Zweite Bundesliga next year, but maybe he's the saviour for this team. Who knows?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Do I think his fortunes will be good with Holstein Kiel? Yes, I think he will get minutes. He is already getting minutes. He's already starting for them. So I think in that way, it's a good move. He's getting minutes in the Bundesliga. He's starting in the Bundesliga. Will he be starting in the Bundesliga next season? I have some concerns. They are presently in the relegate. No, they're 17th.
They're 17th,
right? So they're in
17th
automatic spot.
Yep.
And Hoffenheim ahead of them, but spent 19 million euros on 2 players this winter window. They loaned in 2 more. I don't know if that is a gap that Holstein Kiel will be really able to close, but I am also not a Holstein Kiel expert, including in my pronunciation. He was their most expensive signing, though, John Tolkin. They made 3, but all sort of 24 years of age or under. Tolkin's, 22, I think. So it's a kind of youth movement coming in. To me, there is an idea that maybe there is some level of stability and forward planning there, that even if they get relegated, we're okay with that. We'll have them in the Zweite Bundesliga, and then we'll hopefully come right back up. So maybe if they get relegated, it's not quite as a disaster as, we're bringing in these 3 guys for a ton of money and hoping they hit, and if they don't, we are in trouble. But I'm also not sure that's what I was really hoping for when we were talking about John Tolkin making a move to Europe.
I think the practical goal for Holstein Kiel as a whole, before I get to Tolkin, because I'm actually quite high on John Tolkin right now based off of how he played over the weekend. The practical goal for them is to climb those couple of points, and I guess they need some goal differential help to get out of the auto relegation spots in the Bundesliga and just end up in that playoff spot. Because remember, that is how Germany does their promotion and relegation, is they send down 2 teams automatically, and the third team ends up playing a playoff against a team coming up from the second Bundesliga. And so it's not an automatic death sentence as it is for the bottom 2 teams. And again, that's where they are right now. They're in 17th of 18. They would be relegated if the season ended today. But they could climb those 2 points, 3 points if you want to be automatically above Heidenheim in the table right now. That's a realistic goal for this Holstein Kiel team between now and the end of the season. The 2 Bundesliga stuff is a concern. And it's the biggest downside of this move for John Tolkin when he went from the Red Bulls over to Europe. It's a question mark for the future, and it's certainly something to watch. In terms of the present, he looked really good, I thought, against Bayern Munich over the weekend. I watched a lot of John Tolkin in this game. He played as a left wing back, which is a big theme, I guess, for today's show so far, but did a bunch of inverting into central midfield, which is not new to him. He did that in the Red Bulls youth system coming up with Red Bulls 2. He's a player who had a lot of time as a central midfielder, as a younger player. He had some good attacking moves when he was wider on that left side. Really nice distribution. A couple of chances that he creates fairly early in this game. Was on set-piece duty at times, which I always think is sort of a status symbol for some of these teams. And defensively, I thought he was okay. He wasn't amazing. Was a little bit of a passenger at times throughout the match. But I thought he looked good overall in this game for Holstein Kiel. A really, really promising start. And for him to get minutes, get a start in these in the Bundesliga so early into this tenure against Bayern Munich says something about where Holstein Kiel are as a team, first of all. But it also says something about the impression that Tolkin is making there. I think he's a good player. I think the World Cup is absolutely possible for him to look at that lens once again. But I think he's going to get even better for the rest of this season. And then we'll see what happens to Holstein Kiel between now and then.
Joe, like, how desperate was Tolkin to make a move to Europe?
He has wanted it for a while. He's told me that he at times has been frustrated at how little actual soccer the Red Bulls play. That's me parafrasing. He was not nearly that harsh.
Joe and John Tolkin are best friends.
We didn't talk about gravity, by the way, just in case anybody was asking. But yeah, I'd be more than happy to.
For a minute, I forgot what you were talking about. It was like the Sandra Bullock movie? Why would that have come up? Now I understand what's happening.
No, we actually talked about the Sandra Bullock movie, but not the actual concept of gravity.
Of course.
My mistake. I think he's been ready for a move for a while now, and there have been teams that have been sniffing around John Tolkin for at least a year, if not more than that, which is the case for basically every young player who gets serious minutes in MLS, because that's how the transfer market works. But I think he was quite keen to make a move, Taylor, if that answers your question.
But I think the reason why I ask that is because it is coming from a position of ignorance. But I think about moves that have happened in the past, like Juan Agudelo trying to make the move to Stoke, and we've had Breck Shea just desperately trying to get a move to a Premier League team and it not really working out. Whereas with Tolkin, it felt less desperate to me. To your point, it feels like it's a move. He's wanted to make the move. He's wanted to make that jump. He's wanted to try sort of new, potentially greener pastures. But I do wonder then if this is a situation where he knew what he was getting going in. It wasn't sort of like, I'm desperate to make a move, and even if they're getting relegated, oh, well, at least I'm in Europe. I wonder if there was sort of a like, yeah, I know what it's going to be, but I'm going to get minutes. I'm going to be in the Bundesliga. I'm going to be playing Bayern Munich and having a spotlight on me and the potential to potentially make a move this summer if they did get relegated and if somebody was interested. But also, I wonder if he is just kind of comfortable with the situation and kind of liked what was being sold. And so is okay with it, and as long as he's okay with the situation and isn't sort of then desperate to make another move, I think it allows him to develop and play a position in which he's comfortable, but then also have those wrinkles like inverting that Joe talked about that I think further enhance his game. So it's one where I think initially was very concerned, and now I'm only somewhat concerned. There's still some concern in there for John Tolkin, but less of a desperate situation than I thought it might be.
All right. Well, another new rival in Germany, James Sands, who's now at St. Pauli on loan, Joe, from New York City FC. There is a scenario where Sands and Tolkien play each other in the relegation playoff.
Is that really possible? That's not how the relegation playoff works, is it? Isn't it? You play a team from the next league down. Yeah.
In fact,
next season it could be.
Now we're talking.
Yeah, I messed that up.
That's all right. With James Sands, he's on loan for the rest of this season at St. Pauli. Option apparently for St. Pauli to extend the loan if certain conditions are met. What that looks like, I don't know. I don't know if it's an auto trigger or what it looks like. That's from the MLS release on all of this. Those details have not been made public as far as I'm aware. But
Joe, why would a team want that? Why would New York be okay with that for like an optional extension for another year in which you're paying his salary, but we're not getting any money and he's getting a year older?
Because clubs care what players think of them, which not just in a vain way, but this is what we're seeing with Cucho Hernandez right now, where if a player really wants to go, you can make their life miserable and you can make it very unpleasant to have them around if they're going to make a big fuss about it. And I'm not saying that's the situation for James Sands. I mean, basically, right? You lose leverage. You know, do you want to let him go now and maybe he gets some value and maybe you get to sell him at some point? Maybe there is a loan fee in here somewhere. Or do you want to have him sit around and do nothing and lose all of his value and lose him for free anyway, right? In James Sands' case, I think this is very much NYCFC doing him a favor because he wants to go to Europe. He wanted another bite at the apple after that Rangers move went so poorly in 2022. Remember, I mean, that was a really bad stretch for James Sands. He didn't play very well, was not anywhere near a fan favorite in Scotland, which is at times a bit of a high bar, especially for a foreigner. But James Sands is going back across the Atlantic. I'm curious to see how this is going to go. It is certainly a huge hit for NYCFC, who just lose their starting defensive midfielder for nothing, as you've already said, Taylor. But the hope is that this helps position them as a club that is sort of like a player's choice kind of team inside of Major League Soccer. We'll see if that happens or not. As far as him at St. Pauli so far, he's played in all 5 games since signing for them. First 2 were off the bench, the last 3 are as a starter. So he is, at the moment, a starting player for a team that is mid to lower mid-table in the Bundesliga. They're 13th right now in Germany, not at a real risk of relegation. Sands has been fine for what I've seen so far, which kind of is the James Sands experience, right? The question for him is, can he elevate his game on the ball? Because he is I think, above average, or at least a Bundesliga-level player against the ball. He can cover ground well. I think he reads the game quite well, but he is still limited in possession. And that's the big question mark for him is, can he improve to make it worthwhile to bring him into a roster? If you're Mauricio Pochettino, I'll be honest, I'm skeptical of that happening, but he's playing at a new level. This is the highest level that he's ever played at in his entire career. We will learn something about James Sands, and it seems like we're going to continue to get chances to learn those things because he is getting starting minutes for this team.
Here are my positive notes on this one, because I have more positives than negatives. Number one, I like FC St. Pauli. I like what they stand for, so I like that he's gone there. That's number one. That shouldn't count, but it does. Number two, as Joe mentioned, he doesn't start the first 2 games. He has started the next 3. Those would be 2 wins and a draw for FC St. Pauli, who, as Joe already said, 13th in the table. They were not 13th prior to those 2 wins and a draw. So you could argue then that his partnership with Jackson Irvine, who I had to look up because I was like, why do I know that name? Is he like a former Galaxy guy? Nope, he's Australian. We've talked about him when it comes to Australia. But that's why. Mustache and a ponytail, I think. But I like that partnership. And it has been like competent, good, fine. These are all words that I was sort of writing down watching him play. And so then I went and read this. There's a few different Reddit posts from people asking, like, how is he doing? How has he looked to FC St. Pauli supporters? And it has been a very like kind of definitive German response of like unremarkable, but not in a bad way. As Joe has outlined, like he does the defensive job well. He kind of blocks passing lanes, does a good job of keeping his positioning, is solid on the ball, but unremarkable on the ball. And that does seem to be a thing that is sort of an area of optimism or potential growth for him, both for the individual, but also for the supporters. They were talking about how it feels like he has kind of bedded in well, understands the system, understand the expectations. And now that he has that understanding in a short amount of time, what can he do then to elevate the team and elevate his own individual performances? And so I think in that way, it's a really kind of exciting time for him, I think, because to kind of already be at that level where he's functioning like as required, to be there this quickly means that then you can start to add new little levels to your game and work on little things and polish aspects of your game that you maybe couldn't otherwise polish at that level. So to me, this is a great move for a player who, as Joe said, had a rough time last time he was in Europe. Hopefully it goes better this time.
That's a lot of remarks for someone who's unremarkable from those St. Pauli fans, by the way. Just saying, Taylor.
Pragmatic, I think, was the appraisal. Pragmatic.
There we go. Thesaurus.com's getting a workout with this description. Leonard Maloney is now at Mainz on a 3.5-year contract, Taylor. What do we think of this one? A little tour of Germany for Leonard Maloney.
This is another one where I am like, it's a good move. I don't know if it is good for him in terms of his career, Leonard Maloney, because he goes to Mainz, who are very much near the upper portion of the table, and I think will stay there this season. But 0 minutes since making that move. He's had 2 games on the bench. So he's on the bench. He's in the squad. He's not playing. Mainz playing in a 3-4-2-1. They have a midfield duo of Nadia Mamiri and Kaishu Sano. And that seems to be their regular starters, has been their regular starters. Yeah. So maybe if one of them gets injured, he goes in. Maybe if you need 15 minutes at the end of the game, that's where he's going to be. But I think it's a smart move. You move to a club that are very much more of a Bundesliga staple, if not a title contender or European challenger necessarily in Mainz. But at the same time, it means fewer minutes and maybe less opportunity to get those kind of match minutes that we would like. But when you're staying there, it's more stable. You would assume then the training level is going to be a little bit higher, less dire, more time to develop as a player. It's another one where I am hopeful, but maybe slightly less optimistic.
Yep, what Taylor said. I got nothing else to add.
Joe, I mean,
very good.
It really is. It really is largely, I think, that Leonard Maloney is, I think, kind of as we've talked about, similar to James Sands in that, like, he's going to do the defensive job. We know that. Is he going to turn under pressure and play the ball forward? Probably not. And that's where we had a conversation previously about maybe he could be a center back option given the lack of options there. And that is maybe a thing that could be explored, especially if he adds a bit more passing variety to his game. We just need to see him get minutes before we can see if he's doing that.
I am much more intrigued by Leonard Maloney, the center back, than I am Leonard Maloney, the midfielder, who, to be honest, I just don't think is a very good player, and I'm just not really sure that he's going to get minutes. But we wanted to include everybody in the U.S. pool that moved in this segment because we want to be completionist about this, and he has played for the U.S. before. Like, he is on the radar. Just my personal view on Maloney is that he is a very limited player who probably doesn't have a huge role to play in his current position anyway for Pochettino. So we'll keep our eyes on him, but he has to play in order for that to happen first.
I think it's important to note, Joe told me off air, if Leonard Maloney spelled his name the way most Leonards do, he would like him 10% more. But that it's Lennard. Joe can't abide these things. Joe is all about proper spelling.
Yeah. Come on, Leonard. Step it up, pal. Leonard's
that's
parents.
Maloney baloney, frankly, Joe. That is not.
Hey, that's why he is the professional hoster right there.
Here we go. One more player to discuss in this segment, Joe. Taylor Booth, who's made a Dutch move to SC Twente. A little bit after the window, this one, but he sneaked it in.
Mommy salami? What are the other, I'm trying to think, other like meats that we can rhyme? Ham? Nah. I mean, there's lots of options for ham. It's too easy. Anyway, ham. Taylor Booth moved to FC Twente from Utrecht on what's been reported as something close to a €2 million deal. Utrecht was third in the table, and now Booth is moving to Twente, who are sixth in the table, fighting for a European spot. I still kind of quietly have some Taylor Booth stock. That might be as more of a fullback or like a box-to-box number 8 more so than a winger because it feels like his end product just has not been there. He also is not the most physical player. But I like his work on the ball. I think he's creative. I think he thinks. I think he thinks the game well. I like Taylor Booth. He is someone that I always have a soft spot for. He just needs to play, man. And to be honest, I don't know if that's going to happen at Twente or not. They're fighting for European spots, and Booth just has not had a whole lot of first-team soccer over the last few years now, between various injuries and just not being first choice on the depth chart. So this is very much a buy low kind of player right now if you're buying USMNT stock. But I'm not ready to sell mine just yet. I'm curious to see if this move is going to work out for him, because I think somewhere he could be at minimum like a regular Eredivisie starting player for one of the better teams in the league. And I still kind of think at 23 his ceiling is a bit higher. So we'll see on Taylor Booth.
But if he scores a goal, Capicola, that's a gola, and that would mean Gabagool, he's in the player pool.
Nice. He's coming for me, Joe. He's coming for me. This is scary. Very good.
I had Mortadell stuck in my head for a long time and couldn't come up with anything.
Good. That's good.
All right,
Well
let's end this segment on that note. When we come back, we're talking about the American stars who are making big moves in MLS. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to USMNT Weekly. Joseph Lowry, let's talk about some of the big moves in MLS concerning American players, not least star of Camp Cupcake, Jack McGlynn, who's been acquired by the Houston Dynamo from the Philadelphia Union in the first cash for homegrown player trade in MLS soccer history. History being made here in intra-league moves, Joe.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think part of me thinks it might have actually ended up being the second, and that maybe that headline is incorrect, but he is one of the first cash trade deals in MLS history. This is the new rule that MLS has passed, that teams can actually send real, actual American currency to other MLS teams in exchange for players. That has not previously been allowed before, at least not so long as that player was under contract. I love this move for Jack McGlynn. Now, we had a sit-down. Sanjay Sujanta Kamara was down at Camp Cupcake with lemon icing, and he did a feature on Jack McGlynn for us over at Backheeled. And McGlynn said to Sanjay, like, he basically said, this is again me paraphrasing, I'm ready for a European move. Like, I want this to happen. And it didn't happen for him. The reporting is that there wasn't really the interest from Europe for Jack McGlynn. There were maybe a couple of offers or like lower level offers. And so instead, the Union flipped him to the Houston Dynamo for a couple million. And now he's going to have a chance to play for Ben Olsen, which I know the sentence I'm about to say still sounds wrong, but it's true. Ben Olsen's possession-based system, where they absolutely dominate the ball and finished, I believe, first in possession in all of MLS last year, is perfect for Jack McGlynn. Olsen is now a possession-oriented coach with Houston. His team really does control possession, and that's what Jack McGlynn's good at, man. He's now going to a team that is going to maximize his strengths and minimize his weaknesses. And I think with the Union, it was the exact opposite, where his weaknesses were maximized because they played a more open game, albeit Jim Curtin did work them back towards being a little bit more ball-oriented last year. But really, this year, we're very much going to play an up-and-down press, long ball, transition kind of game under Bradley Carnell, because that's what Ernst Tanner wants to do in that front office. And they didn't do a whole lot of let Jack McGlynn get the ball on his left foot and ping passes and break lines and do all this fun set-piece stuff. That wasn't the thing for the Union. It wasn't something that McGlynn had a ton of chances to do. I really like this move. I think he's going to be in the shop window in a way that he wasn't in Philadelphia, even though the Union have a very good track record for moving players on. And I don't doubt, by the way, that they tried to find him a European offer that made sense for everybody involved. I just don't think they could. So Houston's another chance for McGlynn to really shine. I think he's going to be a great player for Houston. And it would not surprise me if the summer's probably a little early, maybe a year from now, we're talking about McGlynn in a similar way with European teams circling that, we all kind of thought we would be talking about him already with the Union. I think this is a fantastic move for him.
Forgive me if you mentioned this, Joe, because I was taking copious notes there. They've lost Coco and Hector Herrera.
Yes,
is that correct?
Yep, both.
So I think with that context, it made me even more excited for this move, because it's basically you're losing these two critical, not even key, but like critical players for your squad. And Jack McGlynn is seen as like the targeted replacement where they're spending money to bring him in because he can theoretically do what needs to be done to make that team click. And in that way, I think this is a really smart move. It's this move and a couple others that we're going to talk about, or one other one that we're going to talk about, I think are really worth like spotlighting for a moment, because so often when we have an MLS to MLS move, I think it sort of, at least in my mind sometimes, is immediately like, oh, okay, so he's like an MLS guy, he's a journeyman, they're not really going to kind of push to that next level, there's not going to be a ton more development. And I think that's a very unfair brush with which to paint the league, because in this situation, it's a player who's broken through, been a very consistent performer for a good, mostly good MLS team, and is now getting an opportunity to be a centerpiece of an MLS club. And maybe that does end up leading to a transfer abroad. But even if it doesn't, and he stays in Houston for 6 years or whatever, but is running that midfield and is a really good player and adds new levels to his game, it's a smart transfer to a known league where he knows he can compete, and I think can then elevate from there. And it makes me excited in a way that if he had gone to a struggling Bundesliga club who may be in the fight to Bundesliga next season, or to a Belgian club, or wherever, not trying to dismiss those leagues at all, because they certainly are competitive and have done good things in developing players. I think it's just easier to lose him in the shuffle, whereas in this situation, it feels like they are building around him. That makes me very excited. I have 2 follow-up questions for Joe, though, Ryan, if you'll permit me. I can't shake off the hosting quite yet. I still have
I'll allow it.
Some of that in there.
No,
Thank you,
no
sir.
questions until you do another Italian deli meat rhyme, Taylor. Those are the rules.
Sure. Mortadell has Philly fans thinking, what the hell? Because what are they
Nice.
doing, Joe? What are the
right.
Union doing? I don't understand this team at all. They sacked their coach. They are selling players like it is going out of style, I guess. Yes, right? But yeah, Julian Carranza, Damian Lowe, Jose Martinez, Leon Flock, Jack Elliott, now Jack McGlynn. Not really replacing them, to my mind. They're bringing in young players. Then I guess you can like your academy. But it seems like the expectation around this club is now more so wooden spoon than supporter shield.
I mean, yes, of those two things, that's correct. The good news for the Union is it's not pick one or the other. I think this offseason is very much Ernst Tanner climbing back fully into the driver's seat in Philadelphia. He won the power struggle with Jim Curtin, and Jim Curtin was fired last year, towards the end of last year, after the season was already over for the Union. And he is now fully shifting this team back into Red Bull kind of German soccer. And that's his way of playing. He wants to emphasize the academy. We're going to see Kevin Sullivan play real minutes in MLS this year. We're probably going to see multiple other Union homegrowns get serious minutes this year. I think the McGlynn situation is kind of unique here. Some of the others that you mentioned, Carranza's move was last year. Flock and Elliott were both out of contract. It wasn't as if they're just hemorrhaging players because they, want to recoup transfer fees or whatever. There were different situations for a lot of these guys, and they have replaced a lot of those guys, or are going to replace them in a very Philadelphia Union. We snagged this player from Argentina. We snagged this player from an Eastern European league. We snagged this player from our academy kind of way. McGlynn, I think this is probably a case of he wanted to move, and the Union couldn't find one abroad. Because if Jack McGlynn had been sold abroad, I don't think any of us would bat an eye, frankly, at this move. So it is just the MLS wrinkle. To be clear, I don't think the Union have had a good offseason whatsoever. They have not strengthened in any meaningful way. I guess the thing is, I just don't expect that from the Union. That's not how they do business. They buy players you've never heard of before, which I guess is the case for most MLS teams. They buy players like even the diehards probably haven't heard of before, and they make them largely into quality contributors. Not everyone's going to hit, but if they hit on 50% of their transfers, I think they're still going to be a pretty okay team this year. So I don't think they're going to be a great team in the East, but I also think they're not going to be a spoon team, and I don't think they're going to be particularly close to the spoon either.
Joe, did you spend any time delving into the financials of this one? Because this is a time when I really miss allocation disorder. I'm not going to lie, because there are so many different aspects to this transfer fee.
Honestly, you might have the research, Taylor, more top of notes, top of mind. Somehow the Philadelphia Union, and this is from hearing some things as well, the Union snagged Jack McGlynn, who's from New York, in a way that they shouldn't have, to claim him as basically their player and to put him in their academy and develop him. And the Red Bulls and NYCFC, the two New York clubs, as a result, sort of retroactively got a share of Jack McGlynn stock, is maybe an okay way to think about it, to keep the stock analogies on today's show. And so they, I believe, got a cut of this amount of money that the Union got for Jack McGlynn from the Houston Dynamo, and will get a cut of the Union sell-on percentage that they have should Jack McGlynn actually make another move, whether that's to a different MLS team, different team in the Americas, or abroad, or wherever, right? If McGlynn makes a move on a transfer fee, both of the New York teams are getting a cut of the Philadelphia's cut of the Houston Dynamo's move. Yeah, this one's complicated, and the Union broke rules, and they lost money because of it. But they also made money because of it, so,
There you go. Yeah, that works.
That's how it goes.
Where my head fully started to hurt was then the idea that, but they couldn't the New York teams both have like discovery rights, even though that's not a thing anymore, but they couldn't both be claiming him as a potential homegrown player. So there's an idea that maybe only one of them will end up getting like some sort of compensation.
Insanity.
Again, it makes my head hurt. The other thing that makes my head hurt is trying to understand the cash transfer aspect of things. Is this basically MLS just not wanting to say they're doing transfers for money? Like, can you explain why this exists, Joe, or why this needed to exist?
I guess I'm a little unclear on where your specific point of confusion is with this deal, but this is something that MLS chief soccer officers, people in the front offices have wanted for a long time. Because before, let's say Lucho Acosta or Evander is probably the better example. Evander's unhappy right now in Portland. If another MLS team wanted Evander, practically speaking, there was no way for them to get them, for them to get Evander from the Portland Timbers, because they could only trade allocation money and international slots and other MLS-specific assets. The Timbers know that Evander is worth 8 figures, and they're not going to take allocation money, fake money, for Evander. They want real money because he's actually worth real money. And previously, there was no way for MLS teams to pay real money to the Portland Timbers for Evander. That was absolutely impossible under the roster rules. And I think the idea here is that MLS is a single entity league. They generally don't want their teams trying to outspend each other, and they try to keep all that stuff down. That is now changed, where the big players can move for actual transfer fees, and even players like Jack McGlynn can move inside the league and generate actual transfer fees, because the Union value Jack McGlynn. They didn't want to sell him for allocation money. I don't think they really need allocation money at the moment either. So it opens up more pathways for these kinds of moves to happen. The rule is still called the cash trade rule. And I haven't asked around about this, but my understanding is that players still don't have a say. That's why I think it's called the cash trade rule rather than a cash transfer rule. Because in MLS, if you get traded, and Mats Hummels tweeted about this after the Luka Doncic trade happened. He's like, thank goodness this can't happen in soccer. And Dax McCarty, I think, quoted it with like, well, got some bad news for you, pal. MLS teams can still send these players around the league. Yeah. I believe without their consent. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that is my understanding.
Yeah, I think that was the point of confusion or consternation for me, Joe, was just the idea that it's called a cash trade. Like to me that's the equivalent of being like, yeah, I money bought this. It's just like I don't think you need one of those words in there. So it did feel to me like a little bit definitive MLS of like, we're bringing in a thing that everybody's wanted, that everybody already utilizes, but we're calling it a very specifically MLS thing because that's what we do, baby.
Yay. Well, my question for the group is, if this is the first cash for homegrown player trade in MLS and the second ever using MLS's new cash transfer rule, when is going to be the first crypto for homegrown player trade? I feel like Miami should have like a meme coin coming pretty soon. Surely this is a 2025 thing, right, Joe?
Yeah, Jordi Alba's always struck me as like a meme coin kind of guy. I can see him cooking up something mighty fine in that space. Yeah, I think 2026, Ryan, it's at the line on when we're going to see the first crypto for player trade.
Wonderful. What a world we live in.
It's funny that you all are saying that like 60% joking, I feel like, and 40% legit.
Yeah, it's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We're going to the moon with this one, Taylor. We shall see. Let's talk about Jesus Ferreira, shall we, Taylor, who is now a Seattle Sounders player.
I think bold of you to assume that the moon exists, according to some of the people we've talked about today. Yes, Jesus Ferreira moves to Seattle, a move that I was very meh about until I started doing some reading and remembered that Jesus Ferreira is a very good player and a very good attacker, especially in Major League Soccer, where he broke through, scored a bunch of goals, has had injury issues, don't get me wrong. I think the other thing that I kind of overlooked with FC Dallas is that he has had 3 different managers now, and he is only 24 years old. I for sure thought he was 27. I don't know why I thought that. I saw him play here in Richmond when he's a teenager, but I think because he's been around for so long, I thought he was a bit older. So to then look at a 24-year-old who's, I think, second only to Landon Donovan in goals scored at such a young age in the league, who has had 3 different managers, who has had injury issues, who has played for an FC Dallas team that don't love to spend money and don't always sort of retool in a way that makes them really competitive. I then see this as an opportunity for him to, and this is the other one I was alluding to earlier, similar to Jack McGlynn, make a move to an MLS team where there is relative stability to more stability, that there is consistency in performance, even if there are ups and downs for the Sounders. There is more, I think, proven attacking talent there. I think he can fit in and play a number of roles in a number of different spots, and I think it makes a lot of sense for him. He has had interest from abroad. I did ask AI I'm trying to follow in Graham's footsteps about Jesus Ferreira, and I was informed that he moved to Russia in 2023. That
Almost.
was yeah, exactly. No, but it was like he moved there. What are you talking about? He doesn't play in MLS anymore, and I was confused for a moment. But that's another just reminder that like there's been interest, there have been opportunities for him. He hasn't. They haven't worked for whatever reason. This feels like another one where he could go to Seattle, and maybe he does end up sort of playing there for a good long while. But maybe it's a year or two of scoring goals and playing different roles and looking good and having some consistency, and then he makes that jump from there. Yeah. But I think this is a more positive move than I was initially inclined to think.
It's an interesting one because Ferreira was tired of being in Dallas and wanted to move. He's wanted to move to Europe for a while, as I understand it. And I think moving within MLS was probably not something that was really on his radar at first. And this was a regular old trade rather than a cash deal. But he ends up going to Seattle. I think the interesting part about this move is the Seattle Sounders are going to be playing in the Club World Cup, and Jesus Ferreira wants to go to Europe. And I think the thinking probably is somewhere in here that he's going to be in a shop window in Seattle that he just wasn't going to be in when he was in Dallas, because they're going to be playing PSG this summer. They're going to be playing other absurdly good teams in the group stage of the Club World Cup, and then they're going to go home because, unfortunately, the Sounders they're not going to progress in that competition. But I would not be surprised if this is a stepping stone move. And usually we don't see that in MLS from one club to another and have that be the stepping stone. Usually it's Belgium or the Netherlands or the bottom of the Bundesliga or whatever it is, right? Well, now maybe this is a little bit different in terms of how some MLS teams are able to operate and how we're seeing the Sounders operate here. So it wouldn't be a shock to me, I'll just put it this way, if Ferreira is around for a year rather than for a couple of years. I think this is probably a shorter term kind of situation rather than a longer term one. But to think about Ferreira within the context of the USMNT, I also think this is a fascinating year for domestic strikers in the context of the national team, because Folarin Balogun has been injured, and I think if healthy, he is still basically a lock for any U.S. roster, but he hasn't been, and he hasn't been playing all that well for Monaco really ever since he moved in the first place. I still think he's a lock, but it's not as ironclad as it maybe used to be. Ricardo Pepi is currently injured and will be out for a couple of months and will almost certainly miss that March Nations League window for the United States. Josh Sargent is still a most likely call-up, but he's not an etched-in-stone guy either. We're talking about Ferreira having a chance to kind of revitalize his MLS career after a couple of down years. We've already seen him play a ton of minutes for the national team. Brandon Vasquez is back in MLS, moving from Monterrey to Austin SC for $10 million, which is still mind-boggling to me in terms of that fee. And we talked about Patrick Arjoon a bunch over the last month or so. And he is a player who I think has real potential, even though he's not moving, to maybe get another look with the national team. So I think those three players, and maybe I'm missing a couple of others, but those are the ones that really come to mind as being guys that really have something to play for when it comes to the national team and their prospects with the U.S. this season in Major League Soccer. So I've got my eyes closely on Ferreira, who I don't know is going to play as a 9, by the way. He could be a little bit wider at times this season. Vasquez, Arjoon, maybe a couple of others, but those are really the three that come to mind.
Joe, Dejan Joveljic now with Sporting KC. That opens up a spot. I saw Christian Ramirez moving to the LA Galaxy, so maybe there's another one. Joe, you want to throw him into that conversation?
I mean, Christian Ramirez is probably going to score 15 goals for the Galaxy this year, which is a legit production. I still think we can maybe set that one aside. I think Ramirez is a good MLS player in the right system, and he's going to score a bunch of goals, but I think that's more about the players that are going to be around him in LA rather than his own skill. So I'll set that one aside temporarily, Taylor.
Fine.
All right, let's take one more quick break. When we get back, a few more MLS players to discuss, and maybe if we get time, a listener question or two. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to USMNT Weekly. Tay, we touched on Brandon Vasquez briefly before the break. He back in MLS with that 4-year deal in Austin. Joe is incredulous with the fee involved there. What do you make of it?
I like the move for him, certainly. I don't really understand Austin's finances, not even trying to question them. I literally just have no idea what they are or what they're doing. But I think for Brandon Vasquez, a player who, as I've said with other players, like has familiarity with the league, scored goals at a young age, I think can come into a team that needs a goal scorer and do just that, but wasn't doing that for Monterrey. And even though he starts like pretty well for them, it falls off. I think there's an injury in there too, but largely, like I think with his first clausura, he's only playing one of their final 11 matches. Then he becomes a peripheral figure in the Apertura of 2024-2025. And it's just like not the right scenario for him. He's not playing. He's not really getting looks. The thing that has me optimistic about this move, aside from a fresh start with the team that needs a goal scorer, was reading him discussing his time in Mexico. Joe, did you see any of these quotes from him? Because they had me... He was saying the right things, I'll put it that way.
No, go ahead.
So basically he was saying that it was like a really frustrating time, that he wasn't getting minutes. He wanted to kind of justify the transfer and kind of cement his status there, but also that it was really difficult because Liga MX is so different and difficult compared to Major League Soccer. Because he was saying that basically there's just a lot more physicality and the refs let a lot more stuff go. So you're going to get cheap shots and you're going to get dark arts aspects of defending. And then you're just going to get knocked around a lot more. And he was saying basically he had to learn how to handle physicality. He had to learn how to handle mind games a little bit better. And the thing that really had my ears perk up a little bit was him talking about how the biggest thing he had to learn was that just kind of like being big and getting on the end of crosses isn't going to do it. Being in the right moment is a lot harder when there are better defenders who are more physical. So the biggest thing he felt like he developed in his time in Mexico was basically movement in the box and spacing in the box and spatial awareness and recognizing how to create little gaps of space so you have those little pockets to then be able to get a shot off or get another pass off or get that extra touch to set you up to then get the shot. Instead of just trying to kind of rush shots and make something happen, it felt like at a minimum, it helped him develop the intellectual side of his game, and that's such a critical thing when it comes to attackers, that like instead of just doing the same thing over and over again and hoping that it works out, slowing down to evaluate and read the defenses and understand what they're doing, and then understand how to kind of utilize their strength to your advantage and exploit the underlying vulnerabilities is the thing that he has learned. And so to bring that back to Major League Soccer, I do wonder if we see a different, more well-rounded Brandon Vazquez than we've seen previously. That would be the positive hype way of spinning this one, but it makes me want to watch Austin, I'll put it that way.
There we go. Good stuff. Joe, a couple more deals to speak of. Luca De La Torre, who is coming to San Diego, or has come to San Diego from Celta Vigo on loan with an option to purchase. And while we're talking about Californian deals, Jalen Neal leaving California for the first time, leaving the Galaxy for Montreal. Anything to say on those?
The Neal move, I think, is more interesting and one that we probably talked about less than De La Torre, who I am excited to watch for San Diego. He's going to be a really important piece for them, and I just like watching De La Torre play. His aesthetics are high, even if his defensive strength in 1v1 duels and like final ball is maybe not at the level of a USMNT contributor. But we'll see what happens with him. Jalen Neal is not at that level yet either, but he's played for the U.S. already in a January camp. He's been in and around this team, and I think is a really high potential player who just did not have a path to real minutes with the Galaxy between Yoshida and Emiro Garces. Like, he wasn't going to be a starter for the Galaxy this year. Garces looks like a best 11 sort of center back, and Yoshida is still an excellent player. So Neal ended up being traded to Montreal for some allocation money, which helped the Galaxy because they needed it, and I think gets him in a position to earn real minutes this year. Montreal are quietly a fascinating team for USMNT fans who want to watch some center backs who could peek their heads into the USMNT picture in a more real way over the next couple of years. George Campbell is already there and has been playing well for them. And Jalen Neal is now there and I think should start for a lot of this season. Good on the ball, Neal. He's got work to do to become a little stronger. And I think still has work to do defending in open space, but is a high potential player. And Montreal are basically the island of high potential players with no adults. That's kind of what's going on, is the kids have been let loose to go and play and hang out and see what they can figure out. So we'll see if that ends up being a productive environment for Neal or if it is a little bit more chaotic. Either way, more minutes is a good thing for Jalen Neal.
Yes, indeed. Let's finish up USMNT Weekly with a couple of listener questions that have been submitted. This one, Taylor, from Katie Catano, who says, if Esmir Badrakterovic becomes a top player in Europe, will he be in the running to be considered one of the best American players, even though he doesn't play for the USMNT, of course? What do you think, Taylor? One that got away there?
Maybe. Am I wrong in thinking that there's a lot of maybes to this one? Because, like, that's a big if, right? If he becomes a top player. Like, yeah, if he wins the Ballon d'Or, yeah, he's probably the one that got away. But I think there's Ballon d'Or. There's a long way to go.
I can't help myself.
Before that's fair. There's a long way to go before that happens, is I guess what I'm getting at. He's made the move from New England to PSV, obviously. I think he's played a total of 12 minutes for their senior team thus far. So there's certainly the possibility that he then becomes a key player for them. makes a move to an even bigger club, continues to develop from there. If he has sort of like the middle tier of a PSV player's career, I think he's probably in the top 5 to top 10. There are more than I kind of tend to remember, because I think
who's on your list, Taylor? I'm curious.
Yeah, so like Giuseppe Rossi is always the first name that comes to mind, because it was such a I think at the time there was so much enthusiasm for him. Here's a guy who's playing in Italy and is going to be this big thing, and so losing him felt like this huge blow. But then injuries sort of limit how big of a blow that was. There's a moment where it felt like he's breaking through for Italy. He could be the next big thing. Then he gets injuries, and that doesn't really happen. So he is more of an emotional one than he is an actual, had a wildly successful career one. I think in terms of eligibility, whether or not they were ever actually close to playing for the U.S., Trent Alexander-Arnold is number one, had the American grandma, so had some level of eligibility there. I think he is definitely number one on my list. I would add Thomas Delaney, who had eligibility, Neven Subotic, who easily could have played for the U.S. but chose not to. Jonathan David would be another one that I think probably,
good one,
given the way things are going, probably needs to be included in there. And then a dark horse would be Breda Hangeland, the former Fulham defender who had a good long career. He was also eligible to play for the United States. I think he was born in Texas, or maybe like his dad was. There was some level of peripheral connection. So I would say Alexander-Arnold is probably number one for me. In terms of the length of their career and the successes they had, Thomas Delaney is probably 2, Neven Subotic 3, Jonathan David 4, Breda Hangeland 5. So Bajraktarovic having a mostly successful career in Europe probably puts him 5th on that list, I would say. So yeah, he'd be in there, but I don't think, right now at least, I feel like he is going to be fully the one that got away. If anything, we have others who are kind of playing at that same level.
Jonathan David is criminally low on that list, Taylor. But other than that,
it's so far. Give him a couple more years, we'll see what he wins, and then he
should be number 2 on that list. But it's a good list nonetheless. I sort of had the same reaction to you, Taylor, here. If Esmir Bajraktarovic turns out to be a really good player, he will absolutely be one of the Americans that got away. I don't think we're quite there yet. I'm gonna say this, and I'm not all the way locked in there, but I get some extreme Matthew Hoppe vibes from Esmir Bajraktarovic in terms of how he plays.
Nodding.
Which is great elite futsal player, and just isn't there in a lot of the other parts of his game. I think the Matthew Hoppe thing was a great beach soccer player, is where I landed on Matthew Hoppe. Bajraktarovic is younger. He's had a much more stable career so far and is on track to have a much more stable career than Matthew Hoppe has had. That bodes well for him. And he is a talented player. I don't want people to get this twisted. He is very savvy on the ball, press resistant, super clever, really good ideas, is a very smart soccer player, is extremely limited athletically, and is also still not a guy who has that final product. And at 19, that's okay. He doesn't have to have it all put together. But there are some pretty significant holes in his game that prevent him from moving to PSV and immediately being a holy crap, this guy is a real legit player for us right off the bat. He's played more for young PSV so far than he has for PSV. And Taylor, you kind of got to that earlier. So I think he's a talented player. And actually, I'm not even sure. Have we mentioned yet that he decided to play for Bosnia and Herzegovina? That was maybe a little bit of an oversight on my part. Sorry. That's at the top of my notes, and I skipped it. Okay, great. He decided to go play for somebody else. And that's okay, because I don't really think he was going to be in line for any serious USMNT minutes, but you still want to have all the options you can, to your point earlier in the Caleb Wiley section about depth and quality and consistency out on the fringes of the player pool. So I'm curious to see what he turns into. I just have some pretty large questions about his game and how it scales.
Yeah. I agree with all that, Joe. I think maybe not to the purpose of Katie's question, but it's worth acknowledging, at least for me, or fully acknowledging the lens through which I am seeing this question. Because if we were talking about Bajraktarovic, who is still eligible for the United States, he certainly appears earlier in this episode for players who are doing things in Europe. But I think is also then we're looking at him more as okay, so we know he is a potential Matthew Hoppe, a good five-a-side, good futsal player. But now how does he develop more? What can we see from him? And I think there is more enthusiasm and interest in his career and in his ability if he's eligible for the U.S., whereas now he's not. So I don't know. I'm also not super hyped to learn about a 19-year-old Croatian player playing in the Eredivisie. It doesn't. There's going to be less enthusiasm, interest for me in following his career. And I think also, to go back to the Rossi comparison for a moment, the Rossi one is such a blow because at the time it felt like we desperately needed him to play for the United States. He could elevate that team. He could make them better. It would be sort of a landmark moment to have an American playing at a top league in Europe. I think increasingly more common with dual nationals is either we're never going to play for the United States, as is the case with maybe Trent Alexander-Arnold or Thomas Delaney, or could have played for the U.S., but maybe weren't ever going to be like a fully comfortable senior team player, as Joe has already talked about with Bayraktarovic. And I think so often nowadays when the U.S. is losing dual nationals, it sort of feels more like, okay, than it does really, oh no, that is a disaster for us. Because the last time it felt like a full disaster was Jonathan Gonzalez, and that worked out pretty much okay for the United States. So it can always kind of go either way. When Bayraktarovic wins the Ballon d'Or, maybe I'll be singing a different tune.
Hopefully so. Joe, one more question for you here. You actually said holy crap earlier. I think that's the closest I've ever heard you come to cursing. So let's see how these shots fired at you will get you feeling as well.
One day I heard Joe say all biscuits. So, you never know.
All biscuits.
Wow. Goodness me, Joe. A new side of your character is developing as we speak. This question, this is a take it or leave it from Ben Sundstrom. Brandon Austin is the top dual national Pochettino should recruit, not Luca Colioso. Keep your hands off our Brandon Austin, Joe. That's what I'll say.
Okay. This is not one that I'm going to get on board with Ben on. I'm imagining Ben as a Tottenham fan or like a real fan of Brandon Austin's 9-game loan with Orlando City, or I actually genuinely have no idea where this is coming from. My honest response to this is I think the U.S. has enough backup goalkeepers. Thank you very much. We don't really need another one. Austin's been at Tottenham since he was a kid, came up through their youth system, is English. Like he is from England. He was born in England, grows up in England. But he is also maybe eligible for the United States. This is the weird
thing here.
He's 26 years old. He played once for Tottenham earlier this year. That's his only appearance for Tottenham ever. He may or may not be eligible for the U.S. He did play once for the U.S. at youth level. He played a one U18 game.
And say that less loudly, Joe, because I'm not sure they want people to know that.
The rumblings on the internet, and this is not from like any tier 1 journalists out there from reputable outlets, but both the Reddit and sort of social media rumblings are that U.S. Soccer sent him home from that camp because they realized that he actually wasn't eligible. Yeah. There's something here to do with a parent from the U.S. Virgin Islands. It is a complicated web that I have not even yet begun to untangle, Taylor.
Nor have I. But I can give you my best understanding of it via Reddit comments, like owning that entirely. I did contemplate sending Tottenham just a straight up email with inquiries at Tottenham to be like, hey, can you tell me about him? And then I realized, number one, they're not going to respond, but number two, I'm not sure they would even know. But as I understand, the confusion is that his father was not born in the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, but lived there in some capacity or has some connection to there such that he, I think, is a citizen of the Virgin Islands, even if he does not have birthright citizenship, which for him would mean if you are a citizen of the U.S. Virgin Islands, not the British ones, obviously, but the U.S. Virgin Islands, if you are a citizen of them, then you are de facto a citizen of the United States. That is how citizenship works there. However, I think the offspring of that citizen of the U.S. Virgin Islands does not necessarily get the automatic citizenship. My understanding is that there would be, I think at best, a potential for citizenship through that. It seems like no one is fully confident. It seems like there are conflicting aspects of FIFA law, and I think the FIFA law regarding citizenship and eligibility is so often changing and being amended that it would probably require U.S. Soccer to kind of figure these things out and have some lawyers look at this and maybe have some conversations with FIFA. So I think it's a possibility, but it's certainly not a tomorrow he could play for the U.S. if he wanted to. And I think that is part of this as well, that even if he broke through at Tottenham and had a few more games for them, I still think there would be enough murkiness around that it's not such a slam dunk, we got to get this kid into camp sort of thing, because to Joe's initial point, there are many other U.S. players who are not playing for their club right now that could maybe still be ahead of him. So until we get that kind of clarity on the situation, or until we need to get that clarity because Brandon Austin is suddenly a Premier League starter, I think right now we should probably be focusing on people who have more direct eligibility, like Koleosho or Henri or Arnie Chase. I still cannot remember which one it is, and I never will remember if it's Arnie or Henri.
I just think Thierry Henry. It's Henri Chase. That's
Okay.
the way I do it. Thierry Henry all day, baby.
Henri it is.
Wonderful.
I will forget that by the next time I mention him.
Nice.
Taylor, you also mentioned you might email inquiries at tottenhamhotspur.com. I imagine they've got more pressing things. If that email address does exist, there's probably some other stuff they're getting on that line that might be hitting the top of their inbox.
Like 47,000 Big Ange out emails. I'm pretty sure that's the only other thing in that inbox.
But
I'll
that's
play
why
for
they
you.
might
That
respond,
kind of
because it would be like, Big Ange out, you guys are bag. Big Ange out, I hate Daniel Levy. Eligibility question? Like, I feel like that's the one they're going to click on, you know?
Yeah. Complicated birthright citizenship conversation, Tottenham? Yes, please. Let's do it. Yeah,
It's
very good.
It's funny, Taylor. I'm glad that you broke that down. Even with we're still like lightly speculating here because we don't have that sort of insider info on this topic. But there are people at U.S. Soccer who do this stuff, like who check eligibility, and it like this is a real semi common thing at U.S. youth national team levels because the U.S. is always looking for players. Like they're always looking for dual nationals. That has been a key part of the program for a long time. I mean, kind of forever, really, going back to the beginning of the U.S. men's national team. It is like a core pillar. Maybe the U.S. don't want to be quite as reliant on that as they are. I think that would be a completely fair thing to feel. But this program does follow up these kinds of leads. Like they find players, they figure out what the backgrounds are, figure out what the eligibility situation looks like. So I love that you laid that out because I can say with some level of certainty that these conversations, whether about Brandon Austin or other players, have been had and are being had in U.S. soccer in various corners of the program.
That is correct, Joe. I still think there is, I can't remember who it is. I think there's an American who was discovered for eligibility via Football Manager. That might also be the case for Ben Brereton Diaz, who now plays for Chile. I think he also was like I think the Chilean Federation was like, wait, what? Why does he have that flag next to his name? Let's talk about this for a moment. But I think there's another American who like popped up in there and everybody was like, wait, hold on, what now? How can he play for us? Let's make that happen. And then maybe they did. So there are people doing that, but I like that they can then justify playing Football Manager as a legitimate expense when it comes to scouting for the U.S.
Doing research for these couple of questions because they're both eligibility themed.
Yep.
It was a great like guys remembering dudes moment for me earlier on today, except it was just me remembering dudes. The one that really got me, Ryan, I don't know if this is going to hit for you.
Is that why your name today is Joe Corona for purposes of broadcasting, who is the dual national himself?
I cycled through another Joe name for our local recordings. No, the name that really got me, Taylor, Jeremy Toljan. Do you remember Jeremy Toljan for Borussia Dortmund?
Yes, I do.
Never played for the U.S. I don't think he's played for anybody at senior international level. But as I was trying to build out my list of guys who didn't play for the U.S., but I think were kind of eligible, he didn't really end up making the cut. But there were a lot of, wow, remember that guy kind of moments, and it was just me sitting on my couch. So, you know.
The two with that in mind that always, like, just throw me for a loop is because like when they were coming through with a certain club's academy, I remember being like, well, that's never going to happen. Like they're playing for that club in that competition. There's no way we're going to get either of the Tillman brothers. And they both were very publicly like, nah, we don't really want that. We want to focus on Germany and our club career. And now they both played for the U.S. and it's a weird world we live in.
Joke's on you. You're not good enough to play for Germany.
Yeah. They kind of said that less publicly, I think, as time went on. Their emphatic emphasis on playing for Germany,
There we go. Thank you very much indeed. That is another episode of USMNT Weekly in the books. If you want more content from us, of course you'll find it on this feed. But patreon.com/Total Soccer Show is where you'll find more, an ostentation of content, if you will. Plenty of episodes on there, bonus video, and access to our Discord server where all the cool kids are hanging out. But for now, Taylor Rockwell, thank you very much indeed for your USMNT Weeklying today.
Thank you very much, my friend. It is lovely to have you back. You were missed, and it's always wonderful to have you on the program, even if Graham chose to boycott your return by sitting this one out.
Yeah, 1 in, 1 out for the Brits for this one, but we'll see how we go for the next recording. Joe Lowry, a pleasure as always, my good man.
The pleasure was all mine, Ryan. Glad you're back, bud.
Thank you very much indeed. Listener, thank you very much for joining us on this one. We'll be back on the feed very shortly indeed, but for now, bye!